From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. As I'd mentioned earlier this week, I'm in a remote location fielding a number of pursuits. But this letter from Garrett sent me on one of my favorite rabbit holes, the kind of thing that draws you into a place past time. I looked up to realize hours had passed, hours I frankly didn't have the luxury of spending. But time well spent nonetheless. Garrett, here's what you said. Hi guys. I recently stumbled upon a clickbait story about a VHS tape that was passed around in the early 90s. It was a 25-minute or so video, supposedly tutoring people on how to properly rob graves. The video seems remarkably authentic, mostly because the young man tutoring us seems so real. He seems to be speaking candidly and has an occasional stutter. Throughout the video, this kid is handling a very real-looking human skull. Apparently, nobody has ever identified the star of the video, despite his speech impediment, his accent, and his unique appearance. Garrett says, I would be interested to know if grave robbing is actually a modern occurrence, as this young man seems to suggest. The lore of the video is an interesting tale in itself. Garrett has attached a link to a video called Grave Robbing for Morons. Thanks for keeping me entertained while I run. Hey Garrett, thank you. Matt, Noel, I posted the video Garrett mentioned, and I hope you guys have a chance to watch some or all of it. Here's what's going on. While I can't conclusively speak to the veracity of this video clip, I can tell you it's fairly graphic. The video is much like you've described, Garrett. The camera is handheld, the background is dirty. The person in the video walks through what they claim are best practices for removing a skull from a corpse, from entering a cemetery or grave site surreptitiously and getting away. They also talk about the best practices for removing skin from the skull and so on. The video is pretty long and it goes in depth. In fact, it goes on long enough to make me feel like it may be a sincere effort rather than a prank or an attempt at anti-comedy, but I'm still on the fence here. It is worth a watch. It's freely available on YouTube, if for nothing more than curiosity. In terms of practical grave robbing, it's very clear this video was made before the advent of smartphones. I'd say this is after 1987, because if you look closely, you can see a VHS tape of Evil Dead 2 in the shot. The accent is indicative of New York, unless the person here is acting. The host, as far as I can tell, remains unidentified, though there are some interesting internet sleuths who feel like they have some leads on this. It's also tough to tell whether this skull is real. The whole thing could be a student film. But if it is a student film, wouldn't a classmate have come forward by now? And in terms of removing flesh from bone, the advice just isn't good. Don't follow it. The advice about how to quietly do stuff at night, however, does make sense. It's practical for any number of situations, including stuff like bombing, graffiti, or breaking and entering, urban exploration, and so on. Back to the video itself, it's a fascinating rabbit hole, whether it's fake or legit. But the bigger question you've asked, Garrett, is about grave robbing. And I am unfortunately here to tell you, and all our fellow conspiracy realists, that grave robbing is still very much a thing in the modern day. It's a huge industry, and the process of grave robbing, the motivations behind it, and the nuts and bolts of the process may not be occurring in the way we'd initially imagine. I mean, I believe this could be a good, if grisly, full episode of stuff they don't want you to know. Picture Stefan from Saturday Night Live saying, "Modern grave robbing has everything. Angry archaeologists, illicit activity under the cover of night, meth heads, the Chinese government, ancient Native American mounds, and the Bureau of Land Management." So first, the days of resurrection men are long gone. Medical schools and research institutions can legally buy human remains, even if the provenance is often dodgy. In the U.S., for instance, most corpses receive a prompt burial, and the bodies that get donated to science usually end up on the dissection table. Their bones get sawed to pieces, they get destined for cremation eventually. So this means that most skeletons that are used for medical study do come from overseas. And that means that they often arrive without the informed consent of those people, the skeletons back when they were alive, and often they're received in violation of the laws of their country of origin. I mean, honestly, you can go buy human bones for yourself right now if you know where to look. Check out, for instance, Curiosities from the fifthcorner.com. That's all one word. Fifth is number 5th. So Curiosities from the number 5th corner.com. India has for a long time been the world's main source of bones used in medical studies. Back in 1985, the Indian government outlawed the export of human remains, and the global supply of skeletons collapsed. Western countries then turned to places like Eastern Europe and China. But often, medical professionals considered those countries or those regions to be inferior sources of skeletons and bones because the producers didn't have much experience creating what the experts would describe as display quality specimens. And it turns out that what's known as India's bone trade continued as a black market. This meant there was a renaissance in grave robbing, one that in all likelihood continues today. There was one place that was called the Bone Factory, referenced in an article in Wired, that operated successfully for more than a century before two workers there started drinking at a bar and casually running their mouths off about their day jobs or night jobs, which were robbing graves. This is a gruesome example, but other grave robbery is less motivated by getting bones and oriented more toward robbing for what are known as grave goods, the artifacts and the treasures buried with the dead. This could be anything from precious metals in jewelry to, ancient vases and ancient relics. In an article for Vice, a reporter named Oscar Rickett spoke with an archaeologist named Delphin Weiss about how methamphetamine-fueled grave robbers hit the grave robbing scene in the 1990s and then became enormously prominent in the 2000s. Delphin noted that meth makes people actually pretty well suited for grave robbing. Think about it. They have a lot of energy. They keep weird hours, and they tend to focus the majority of their time on activities that help them fund their addictions. Delphin noted that the biggest cases of meth-motivated grave robbing occur in places like Kentucky, West Virginia, Georgia, the Four Corners region, and across the Southwest in general. The sites that are targeted are often Civil War sites or Native American sites. And this archaeologist, Delphin, says they've personally come across meth labs in the middle of nowhere. And sometimes the people in charge of those labs actually put up booby traps. The grave robbers, when they get whatever they have found, be it in an ancient Native American mound or be it at the site of a Civil War battle, they usually go and sell these objects directly to their meth dealer. And the meth dealer functions as a middleman. Or they sell it to someone they know who is already an established black market dealer of Native American goods. And at that point, it starts being distributed through networks across the US, or it just gets sold on eBay, and it's pretty hard to track down and stop this illegal trade. You might ask yourself, why desecrate a grave? Well, unlike the guy in the grave robbing for morons video, who mainly talks about the thrill of doing this and talks a little bit about how it could also be a lucrative business, this seems to be entirely a business decision in many parts of the world, and it's one that probably isn't going to stop unless it somehow becomes unprofitable. And this also leads us to an interesting question about statutes. I mean, who's to say local people don't see foreign archaeologists as grave robbers themselves? How long does a body have to be in the ground before exhuming it becomes a scientific enterprise rather than a crime? These are important questions that institutions, countries, and individuals have wrestled with. But to answer your question directly, Garrett, right now, it looks as though grave robbing is a modern-day industry with a long, grisly tradition and one that is set to continue in the future. As for the video that you have mentioned, there are a lot of things that seem a little off about it. Aside from the advice, I would also, I'd love to hear from our fellow conspiracy realists about whether or not you think this is legit, what you think the motivation is, and whether they'll actually find this person. So I'm signing off from an undisclosed location. Hope to talk to everyone soon. In the meantime, please write to us about this directly. You can email us. We are conspiracy@iheartradio.com, or you can call us. We are 1-833-STD-WYTK.